They picked her out from the crowd, an elderly woman. At first glance, there was nothing particularly striking about her. She looked like any other travelogist. Another face in the queue, someone to be processed, inspected, and dismissed. But when security asked her to open her bags, something shifted in her expression. It wasn't fear or annoyance, no, it was something more profound, as if a memory, long buried, had suddenly emerged from the shadows. The officers grinned smugly as they began to sift through her things, completely unaware that this standard procedure would soon become an unforgettable moment etched in everyone's minds. Before we go further, where in the world are you watching from today? If you value true stories of bravery, unsung heroes, and moments of unexpected grace, please consider subscribing to support more content like this. The line for security curved throughout the grand atrium of the federal building, a long, winding symbol of administrative red tape. Rain slammed against the towering windows, casting gray reflections across the floor and adding to the already strained mood. Amid the waiting crowd stood Isolde, tall and poised, a 68-year-old woman with steel. In her spine, her silver-threaded hair was tucked neatly into a bun. Her outfit was simple yet pristine, contrasting with the casual impatience of those nearby who hunched over their phones or whispered complaints under their breath. Isolde stood with her hands calmly clasped in front of her, eyes forward, still, and composed. The checkpoint was a flurry of sounds metal detectors beeping, conversations overlapping, orders barked by uniformed staff. One such staffer, Officer Rustin, stood out. He was in his 30s, his expression permanently set in a scowl, and his tight uniform clung awkwardly to his broad frame. His eyes scanned the crowd with practiced suspicion. When they landed on Isolde, they lingered too long. He motioned sharply for her to step forward. Identification, he said flatly, extending his hand. From her bag, Isolde calmly withdrew an ID card and handed it over. The plastic was aged and the edges frayed. Rustin flipped it over with a frown. "This is expired," he pointed out. The appointment notice said it would be accepted. She responded, her voice clear. If soft, she retrieved a neatly folded letter bearing an official seal and passed it to him. Rustin gave it a cursory glance before handing it back. "Purpose of your visit? I have an appointment," she answered simply. "What kind of appointment?" he asked, raising his voice. "Just enough to attract attention." Isolde hesitated slightly. "It's personal." That answer seemed to confirm his suspicion. Around them, other travelers, young, talkative, stylish, waved through quickly with superficial checks. But Rustin's gaze had narrowed on her. He signaled to his colleague, a more solidly built officer with graying hair and a tag that read Loretz, "Officer Loretz, I need backup for a secondary screening," Rustin said. Loretz approached, mirroring Rustin's dubious stare. "Step aside, ma'am." Isolde did so immediately, her body subtly shifting into a posture that almost resembled a formal stance. When she replied with a reflexive, "Yes, sir," both officers exchanged glances. Rustin raised an eyebrow. "Bag," he said, pointing to her older, worn duffel that sat apart from her smaller rolling suitcase. "Open it." "May I request a private inspection?" she asked calmly. Rustin shared a smirk with Loretz. "No, open it here." Raindrops trickled from her coat as she stood still, her composure unbroken, though a sliver of her patience had begun to wear thin. The fluorescent lighting above cast sharp shadows on her face. Around her, a small cluster of people began to watch, sensing something unusual unfolding. "Is there a problem?" she asked steadily. "That depends on what's inside that bag," Rustin retorted. A few onlookers, including young office workers who had paused with their morning coffees, watched curiously. One woman frowned, uncomfortable with the scrutiny directed at the elderly traveler. The rain outside provided a steady soundtrack to the unease inside. Isolde placed her duffel on the inspection table and began to unzip it slowly. "I would prefer this be done privately," she repeated, her voice unshaken. "And I'd prefer full cooperation," Rustin said, now more forceful. "Either we do this here, or we take you to a room where the questions get much more serious. Your choice." A flicker of something passed through her eyes, not dread, but a deliberate evaluation. She'd made tough choices before. This was not unfamiliar terrain. "Very well," she replied quietly, stepping aside. Rustin donned a pair of latex gloves with exaggerated drama. The snap echoed loudly, drawing further attention. Phones emerged from pockets to document the spectacle, since you insist on being difficult. "We'll handle it ourselves," he sneered. Isolde's face remained neutral, but her eyes revealed a whisper of wariness. She'd seen this before, albeit in different circumstances. Loretz opened the bag and began removing her belongings. A prescription bottle, a framed photo carefully wrapped, but not unwrapped, a dog-eared volume of Tennyson's poems. Each item was handled with less care than the one before. Man murmured to his friend, "This just doesn't feel right." The friend nodded but didn't look away. "What's this?" Rustin held up an ornate keyhole, delicate, unique. "It once opened something that was better left closed," Isolde said evenly. Rustin chuckled. "Very mysterious. Big fan of spy thrillers, are we?" They continued, pulling more personal items from the bag litters, medical records, all placed under harsh lighting for all to see. Loretz found a small notebook. "Dresdenvale Operation, 1976. He read aloud, butchering the name. "What's that? Some retirement club?" Isolde remained quiet, eyes focused ahead, her silence only fueling their cynicism. "These old folks always think they're so important," Rustin said loudly for the crowd's benefit. She didn't react. He reached deeper and pulled out a small, unmarked box, opening it without permission. Inside was a tiny metal pin military. "Clearly a memento," he asked. "Of those who are no longer with us," she replied. He tossed the box aside carelessly. The pin slid across the table with a clink, and for the first time, her face reacted. "Please be careful with that," she whispered. "Oh, is it worth something?" he mocked. "Not in currency," she answered. The final compartment of her duffel remained. Rustin grabbed the zipper slowly, theatrically. "Let's see what other relics you're hiding," he said. Before he could open it, a woman in line spoke up. "Is this really necessary? You've already gone through everything else? Security protocol, ma'am?" "Step back," Rustin barked. Isolde gave the woman a brief nod of thanks, but stayed stoic. The rain hammered harder now. She seemed to be listening to it, her mind elsewhere. Perhaps decades ago, in another storm, another place. "ID verification," Loretz said into his radio. While they waited, Rustin picked up her address book, going to visit friends. He asked mockingly, "Some of these are international addresses." "Most of them are dead," she replied softly. Even Rustin paused at that. "ID inconclusive," came the radio response. Subject listed as Isolde M. Thorne. File restricted. Possible government connection. Rustin narrowed his eyes. "What?" "Department." "I'm retired," she said. "From what role?" "That's classified." Rustin scoffed. "Sure, and I'm the president." Some murmured in the crowd, now visibly growing. The mood was changing. Phones were recording. More people stopped. Some began to doubt what they were witnessing. The energy in the room had shifted. What began as casual interest had evolved into something more palpably collective unease. The arrogance in Officer Rustin's demeanor now clashed uncomfortably with the quiet dignity of the woman standing. Before him, Officer Loretz glanced at his partner, his expression no longer smug, but subtly wary. He stepped aside to make another call, lowering his voice this time. Rustin, however, seemed determined to hold on to his authority. "You think acting mysterious is going to get you through this faster?" he asked, tossing her worn address. "Book back into the open bag. You've got no idea how things work these days, lady." Isolde exhaled slowly. "I'm very aware of how things work." "Oh yeah," Rustin leaned in, voice laced with sarcasm. "Then maybe you can explain why your name flag's a restricted file with no access protocol." A pause. Then she looked up at him steadily, directly. Her voice was firm, but not loud, because people died for it to stay that way. The silence that followed was louder than anything spoken. Even those at a distance turned their heads. Loretz returned now visibly stiff. "She's not lying," he said reluctantly. "There's a sealed federal record. Access denied, even to us." Rustin blinked. "So what? That doesn't mean she gets to bypass inspection." "No," Loretz said carefully, "but it means we need to stop treating her like a threat until we know what we're dealing with." Isolde gently picked up the metal pin from the table and cradled it in her hand. "You're young," she said softly. "Both of you. You grew up with screens and satellites and soft war. But once, there were people who stood quietly in the dark so others could sleep in peace. Not for glory, not even for thanks, just because it had to be done. She wasn't seeking sympathy. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet finality. One of the young women in line, perhaps no older than 25, spoke, almost reverently, "Are you ... military?" Isolde smiled faintly. "That's not the word we used. But yes, in a manner of speaking." Rustin shifted. Awkwardly, he was losing control, and the crowd's energy had turned. "You've made your point," he muttered. "Take your things." She packed slowly, methodically. As she zipped her duffel shut, Lorette stepped closer and asked quietly, "You were in Dresdenvale, weren't you?" She didn't reply with words. Instead, she held his gaze. And he knew. "God," he murmured, "that was you." A moment later, a tall man in a crisp, dark uniform approached quickly. His ID badge swung as he walked, and both officers straightened. "Immediately, Ms. Thorne," the man said, addressing her with a level of respect that made the crowd pause. "We've been expecting you. My apologies for the delay." "No apology needed," she said. They were doing their job, perhaps a bit too eagerly. The man gave a tight nod to Rustin and Lorette's. "Her clearance exceeds ours. She goes through now." Without another word, he escorted her toward the inner gate. The glass door opened with a hiss, closing behind them with a final, definitive seal. Left behind, Rustin looked hollow. The crowd began to disperse, whispering among themselves. What the hell was Dresdenvale? One woman asked. "I don't." "No," her friend replied, "but it sounds like something we were never meant to know." As the rain tapered off outside, the atrium settled into an uneasy quiet, and she disappeared into the corridors of the building, just another shadow returning home. Her story, mostly hidden, had flickered briefly into the light, not to impress, not to be remembered, but to remind that sometimes the quietest among us carry the loudest histories.